Turn down my one. See how it looks on this.
Because I think he got a nice look on this one as well on the right. So yeah.
Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to KurdistanWISC International Supporters. We thank you for joining us this evening, and we hope to have a very successful discussion. My name is Mabas Jack, and I'm a master's student here at SOAS University.
My name is Farazani Hussain. I'm also a master's student here at SOAS University.
Tonight, as you know, is KurdistanWISC International Support is crucial. The nature of the discussion today is exactly that, but we also delve into not only why international support is crucial, but the various forms of international support. So, be it military support to the Kurds in Kurdistan, be it diplomatic or political support, or be it humanitarian.
So, without further ado, I'll give the floor to this special guest tonight, and please do introduce yourselves and tell us a bit about yourselves, and thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Great to see such a big turnout. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak this evening. My name is Bayan Sami Abdulrahman. I'm the Kurdistan Regional Government High Representative to the UK. I'm Kurdish, but I was born in Baghdad. My family is originally from Sinjar. We're not Yazidi though, there are non-Yazidis also in Sinjar or Shingar. My family were exiled. Saddam Hussein sentenced both my parents to death in the 1970s. So we came here in 1976. So I've grown up in Britain. I went to university. Some of my classes were in this building. And I worked as a journalist for 17 years at many newspapers, including The Observer and the Financial Times. 10 years ago, I was appointed the High Representative for the Kurdistan Regional Government. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Michael Stevens. I work at the Royal United States Institute, which is a British defence and security think tank based in Whitehall. We are affiliated with the Ministry of Defence, but we are not part of them any longer. I am the head of our Middle East program at RUSI. I'm also the director of our office in Qatar, from where I do the vast majority of my work. Although these days I spend most of my time either in London or at Hill, so I've been focusing very heavily on the Kurdish question for a number of years, and also on Syrian and Iraqi security. So this is obviously a key moment. It's something that I've been focusing on for the best part of the last 5 or 6 years, before the Arab Spring, after the Arab Spring, and of course with the angle from the Gulf as well. I was able to have a lot of first-hand experience of Syrian national coalition politics in the Gulf, in Doha, and some of the problems that are associated with that too. So I'll be taking a less personal view, obviously, than Bayan. I don't have the same family this year as I have Adam here, but I hope you will find my views slightly different and interesting.
Great, thank you so much for the invitation. I would like to be brief. My name is Mariana Habidaki. I'm not actually a Kurdish origin, so it's not important. I'm Greek. I will speak here from my actually academic background rather than their position. I'm sure here they have more interesting up-to-date events being about. My focus is on international relations, Middle East in general, but with particular interest in the Kurdistan. And at the moment, I'm at Reading University lecturing and doing research. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I think I did try. Thank you very much for the organizer inviting us here together, and I'm very delighted to have a speech on this issue. And I'm Semo. I'm from Rojava and representing the Democratic Union Party in Rojava, and we try to inspire revolution.
Thank you, panelists, for joining us this evening. We appreciate the presence of all four of you. The situation in Kurdistan at the moment is a very complicated one. We understand that maybe the 2-hour slot that we have this evening may not be necessarily enough to completely understand the whole situation and get to some kind of conclusion. However, we have put together a 5-minute video just to get the evening started as an introduction, simply to contextualize the situation that's going on in Kurdistan at the moment, both in Rojava, in Kobani, in Sinjar. So please join us in watching this video, and we hope you enjoy it.
Innocent people are in an open massacre, and people are turning blind. Civilians are having to put up guns to fight, and we're here doing and they need military support. This military support doesn't necessarily have to be pushed on the ground. It could be in the form of you can give us hard velocity missiles, you can give us anti-tank weapons. We're fighting friends for the assault right now. We need support now. We need it as soon as possible because some people are dying. So many innocent children are dying. Our people of the world, the West and the East, come together and fight. Now it's only one.
The world is in the sea of absolutely atrocious, appalling has been Turkey's role in all this. And there is a right now, there's a right to protect, that is international law. There's a right now for all these countries in the world to support the Kurds in their fight for freedom and fighting ISIS and playing our
Kurdistan should be on the agenda of everyone who is interested in human freedom and free lives irrespective of their religious domination or their gender. I think it's crucial for us here in Britain to be standing with the people of Kurdistan. If the international community does not support them, no country where the Kurds coexisted, may it be Syria, Iraq, Iran, or Turkey, is not supporting currently any of the Kurds on the ground.
They portray themselves as tough guys to the world. They see women as just little things, but one of our women is worth 100 of them.
The world has a duty to support the Kurds defending the army against the wickedness that is right. Not only do they have a duty, they are legally entitled to so to do. And it's very urgent, humanitarian as well as heavy artillery.
And I long to see a united Kurdistan. Thank you very much.
Before we actually start tonight, we want to hold a 1-minute silence simply because the barbaric actions of ISIS to Kurds and otherwise has been something which the whole world should stand in solidarity with. And for that reason, we'd like to take just a minute. Please show your solidarity in this way. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. And also just to remind everyone, tonight is the event. However, we do realise that international support must come from us first, and for that reason, we do have a head or box. They've been doing amazing work, and the money that that you could possibly give to us will go to a good place. We do know that Kurds are very generous people as well, so please do provide. So further to that, tonight's event will be live streamed, and also we'll be using the hashtag KurdistanWISC in order to further boost tonight's discussion into the wider community. So thank you.
Thank you. I saw the video here, and it did give some kind of idea to us for us to be able to kick off the evening. Panelists, I was wondering whether you could maybe contextualize further for us the events that have been going on in Kurdistan in the past year with regards to Syria and Iraq and ISIS as a whole. So please, Bayan, maybe you can start us off.
Thank you very much. Well, I think most of you know what happened from June the 9th, let's say, when ISIS took over Mosul. Iraq changed overnight. We in the Kurdistan region in Iraq found ourselves with a new neighbor, the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. We now share a 1,000-kilometer border with ISIS. That changes everything, both in terms of security, not both, sorry, in terms of security, humanitarian crisis, and the political situation in Iraq. And of course, ISIS has been operating in Syria, so the people of Syria, the Kurds of Syria, have had to deal with ISIS. And we can talk about the other Kurds in Turkey and Iran later as well. With regards to the Kurdistan region, finding ISIS on our doorstep meant that we had to deploy our Peshmerga along this 1,000-kilometer border. We also had to deal with Shingal, ISIS taking over Shingal. They also, of course, forced out Christians, Turkmen, Shia Muslims, Sunni Muslims who didn't agree with them. So that now in the Kurdistan region, we have about 1.5 million Kurdish, Arab, Muslim, Christian, Yazidi, refugees and internally displaced people. Refugees from Syria, mostly Kurds, and internally displaced people from Iraq. 1.5 million compared with our own population of 5 million. So you can imagine the pressure that's putting on services, on electricity, water, sanitation, education, health. Hundreds of our schools are housing refugees, so the school term hasn't started for many of our children. Dahog, which is the smallest province in all of Iraq, has taken about 63% of IDPs and refugees. So we describe it as the smallest province in Iraq with the biggest heart. Health clinics in Dahog are now open 24 hours a day. That's the only way they can cope with the number of patients. Hospitals are just overstretched beyond limit. We already have several camps in Kurdistan, all over Kurdistan, but again, the focus is mainly Dahog. But we need to build another, maybe 24 camps. Every camp needs a fire engine, every camp needs an ambulance, every camp needs a mobile clinic, it needs some kind of a school. All of that needs money, and this is where fundraising by the community abroad is really crucial. Of course, the UN is involved and engaged in Kurdistan, but I'm sorry to say that there are many complaints about the UN being too bureaucratic, carrying out survey after survey for no discernible reasons. Some of the surveys are, of course, very useful. You need to know the profile of the population, the refugee population, but to repeat the survey over and over again, or to have 2 or 3 UN agencies doing similar surveys just seems ridiculous, bureaucratic, and a waste of money. And the UN is frankly stretched. There are many crises around the world, and the UN is having to deal with all of them. So we also, as a community, and particularly those of us abroad, need to do something to help. There are many fundraising events among the community. There are many charities that you can donate to, and I do ask you to do that. Actually, try and visit the camps yourself if you can. About a month ago, I went to a camp in Dahog. Previously, I'd visited camps in a church in Erbil to see the IDPs. When I went to the camp in Dahog, there were mostly Yazidis in that camp. And of course, walking around, I only saw men and children. And I said, look, I want to talk to some women. And they said, you have to go into a tent. So metaphorically, we knocked on the door of a tent and asked if we could go in. There was one elderly gentleman and about 6 younger women in this tent, maybe 7, 8 actually, women, and a few children. But the longer we stayed chatting, the more children turned up, which was great. That tent that we had randomly picked to go into had lost 2 girls, 2 children, aged 8 and 9, that were taken by ISIS as women and children, 8 and 9 years old, and they had lost 6 men. That's just a random tent that I happened to ask to enter. So the situation is dire. The Kurdistan regional government, the population in Kurdistan is doing its best, but it's beyond our capacity. We need the international community, we need the Kurdish community abroad to help us. You can help us by raising money, by sending goods, but also you can help us by writing to your Member of Parliament, writing to the ministers in the European Parliament and the British Parliament, urging them to do something, urging them to take action. They do take note of letters from constituents. One British Member of Parliament told me if an MP gets 3 letters on the same subject, he or she feels that they must act. It only takes 3 letters to one MP to make them think that they have to act. On the humanitarian front, we're not really getting much help from Baghdad. Sometimes I wonder if we're really part of Iraq. It seems to be a very thin thread holding Kurdistan to the rest of Iraq right now. We share a 1,000-kilometer border with ISIS. Baghdad has helped us very little with the refugees and the displaced people. If there's a flood in a remote village in Wales, David Cameron gets on a helicopter and goes and visits that village. Where is Prime Minister Abadi? Why has he not been to visit the refugees? Are they not his own people? Are they not human beings, even if he doesn't consider them his own people? Not only is Baghdad not helping us very much with the humanitarian crisis, we have been under an economic embargo from Baghdad for most of this year. In the past 2 days, a deal has been announced whereby Baghdad will release some of the budget that it has been withholding this year in a swap for oil sales by the Kurdistan regional government. This is a wonderful step forward and a good thought in relations, and I hope that we can build on that. And we expect Prime Minister Michigan Barzani to go to Baghdad with a senior delegation shortly to continue the negotiations and build on this. But really, the budget should never have been withheld. Some people say it was withheld because we were exporting oil. It was withheld in January. We didn't start oil sales until May. So I don't see the logic in that. On the military front, our Peshmerga are valiant, they're brave. Some weaknesses were shown early on. ISIS took everybody by surprise. The way they attack took everybody by surprise. And the level of weaponry that they had managed to capture. And frankly, the Peshmerga were outgunned. There were instances where waves of suicide bombers in Humvees and tanks were hitting Peshmerga positions, and the Peshmerga only had Kalashnikovs that can't penetrate that kind of armor. We have been calling on our international friends to supply weapons to the Peshmerga. We're specifically calling for heavy advanced weaponry. We're also asking for weapons and training and equipment to counter unexploded devices. Unfortunately, a large number of the Peshmerga casualties are not from the advances that the Peshmerga make. We seem to be fine there. It's actually once we've captured the terrain and there are booby traps, unexploded devices, and that's where the Peshmerga are hit. So we're asking for training and equipment to deal with that, and I believe Britain is helping us with that, particularly because many British soldiers were injured and killed in the same way in Afghanistan. But frankly, what we're getting is not enough. We are getting help from America, France, Britain, Germany, many other countries, far too many for me to mention. But really, we're not getting the tanks that we need. This is the kind of weaponry we need if we're going to defeat ISIS. We can contain them, we can advance. We've retaken the Mosul Dam and we're still protecting it. We've retaken Zamar. There are many, many advances and pieces of progress that we can report. But if we're talking about a strategic defeat for ISIS, the Peshmerga need to be much better armed. I want to touch very briefly on Kurdistan and Syria.
Sorry to interrupt there. We'll cover, I mean, we set up the evening so that we can cover humanitarian, military, and political and diplomatic support for Kurdistan. Just wanted to thank you for your input. We just wanted to run through that realization along the panel, and then we'll go into the questions.
This one. So I think in the context of that, what I'll do is broaden it out a little bit and discuss why things are the way they are and why Kurdistan is in the middle of a very, very difficult geopolitical and regional situation, which frankly has no easy answers to it. And the answers that we are seeing are wholly insufficient for solving the problem, both in the short term and the long term. I think it became very clear in about 2012, when the war in Syria really started to pick up in terms of casualties, and it became increasingly obvious that the Free Syrian Army was beginning to hold areas of territory inside Syria at the expense of the regime, who was losing ground quite quickly. Its institutions of intelligence were collapsing in some areas. That what we had previously understood as the land of Sham or the Levant was beginning to go through a phase which would lead to very, very permanent and long-lasting changes that we would have to begin to understand at the time, which we didn't really. I think the region and the West is particularly guilty for having a very, very singular focus on Bashar al-Assad as the cause and root of all the evil that has spread forth from the region. But actually, if you look at it, the reason that we are in such a difficult moment right now, and the reason why Daesh or ISIS is so strong, is not just because Bashar al-Assad was murdering his people in the way that he did. It was because the institutions of state in Lebanon, in Syria, and Iraq were actually really so fragile that when the Arab Spring and the waves of discontent began to become more noticeable, which had started in Tunisia and moved across and spread into Bahrain and spread into Yemen, even Oman, of all places, that these institutions were going to come under what they perceived as a potential threat. And so the only way to respond to these was not to reform, because to reform the system itself would be to collapse it, particularly within the Ba'athist context, but to fight back. And when that became clear, there were certain tools that regimes were using in order to galvanize support for themselves. And one was to lean on ethnic and sectarian balances to draw in outside players. You had Saudi Arabia, you had Iran, and even the Turks, who were involved in supporting various factions and groups at the expense of nation states, which has led to a situation now where there is a devolved sense of power, both in terms of the capacity of nation states to govern in that region and in terms of who has the monopoly on the use of force. We now have militias stretching across from the coast of the Mediterranean Sea all the way down near the border with Kuwait, who have more power than the countries they actually operate in and are funded by external players. And I think that at the time, in 2012, we didn't really understand just how serious this particular development was. And then all of a sudden in 2013, a group called ISIS suddenly started to challenge Jabhat al-Nusra, who was the bad guy at the time. Everybody remembers back in 2013, we were all scared about Al-Qaeda, all scared about Zawahiri and the forces of Jabhat al-Nusra taking over the region. And nobody really understood what was happening to the east, which was that there was a mobilization of Sunni discontent triggered by the government of Nouri al-Maliki and its exclusivist policies in Iraq, triggered by the government of Bashar al-Assad and its exclusivist policies in Syria, sponsored by Iran, and on the other side you had the sponsor of Qatar and Saudi Arabia supporting opposition groups, which began to snowball. And it became very clear that this organization, which was becoming known as the Islamic State, emerged from almost insignificance in Iraq, was beginning to become the force that we saw it today. It wiped out almost every other opposition group that stood in its way. It even managed to murder over 1,000 members of Jabhat al-Nusra, the al-Qaeda organization, which didn't happen to agree with it. And we've ended up in a situation where there is absolutely nobody in the region who is able to stand up to this force, which has been able to coalesce money, resources, weapons. It has support from external players, be that individual or sometimes even tacit state compliance. And we now have what is basically the most dangerous threat to the region that has existed since the modern age. And in the middle of that sits the Kurds, who have now, through no fault of their own, been exposed to an entity which is more powerful than Baghdad, it is more powerful than Damascus, and it is more ideological than both of them. And it has a determination to destroy the Kurdish way of life, the Shia way of life, the Christian way of life. And it's not apologetic. In fact, it sees this as a moral goal. This is moral, it's right. And so into that mix, we are now faced with a daunting task, where a number of nation states have come together to try and turn the tide back. At this point in time, the results have been extremely mixed. I think if you compare the amount of Western firepower which was brought down on Baghdad in 2003, more airstrikes were dropped in one night, 475 airstrikes in one night on Baghdad, than in the first 6 weeks of the operation against ISIS, which tells you the level of activity that the West is currently taking to defeat the Islamic State. And in the absence of that overwhelming shock and awe, if you like to call it, use of firepower, the Kurds have had to step up. They've had to fight their own battles without support, without help from anybody else. There's nobody providing help to the Kurds in Baghdad. There's nobody providing help to the Kurds in Syria. These two entities, represented by Bayan and Alan, are fighting this on their own with basically the minimum of help, and in the north, a Turkish neighbor which really doesn't know what side it wants to support and is very confused about whether it likes Kurds or it doesn't like Kurds. And this is putting the region in a very, very difficult point of flux. As a policy advisor, I simply don't know what to say when it comes to dealing with the Turks anymore. Do we support their point of view? Well, I don't know what point of view that happens to be on what particular day. One day they're not terrorists, the next day they are. Is ISIS a terrorist organization? Apparently it is today. That's nice. But we need to see more progress. And at the moment, I think what we're seeing is a gradual understanding which has suddenly taken root, that ISIS actually is going to be here to stay for a very, very long time unless we do something about it. And as I said before, in the middle of that stands Kurdistan. And I think increasingly it has been seen that Kurdistan is really a beacon of hope in the region, an island of potential stability, provided it can be stabilized with the assistance of outside support. And this isn't tying into Saudi Arabia. Supporting Kurdistan is not about picking sides on the Iranian nuclear issue. It's not about picking sides between Qatar and Saudi about who funds the Muslim Brotherhood and who doesn't. It's simply about supporting a people who are actually in an existential fight for their lives, who have always been very pro the idea of liberalizing their economic systems, of liberalizing their ways of looking at the world, of investing in education. And I think that increasingly as the regions to the south of Kurdistan, both in Syria and Iraq, have begun to look increasingly dysfunctional, there is one constant here, which is that the Kurds have been stalwart defenders of their land. They're able to defend it very impressively with very limited range of weapons. And this is becoming one of the only possible hopes for a region which is going through turmoil which will probably last for the next 40 or 50 years. So next, what we're trying to push forward now is a situation where allies in the region, and it's not about ideology, it's not about democracy. Tony Blair's gone. It was a long time ago. I sat in this university protesting against Blair 10 years ago. We're not in that phase anymore when it comes to the region. But what we are in a phase of is dealing with an extremely problematic development, which is the collapse of these nation states and the emergence of a threat which is existential to absolutely everybody that it doesn't like, including Al-Qaeda. So I think that should be enough to give you some context as to where we are today.
the region and the Syrian people, the regional people, civil society, tribunals, most of them. They have been hijacked in this proxy war, and that proxy war was supported regionally and globally by the Western power who was supporting that act. After 1 year's fight, sectarian war, brutal war, and the insisting of the dictator regimes, brutal war, and they realized they are not going to throw out this dictator regime, and the dictator regime thought that will be tested in another. Therefore, they seek to create a tool in the Middle East in the name of revolution, in the name of the religion, in the name of developing the ethnic moral in the Syria in the Middle East. They created such, supported such initiative, which was by this regimes, this regional power, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey, and Turkey, supported for now are supported by all these Western European and Western powers, supported by this. And in this middle chaos and in this brutal civil war, the Kurds wisely assessed the situation, make it clear that they cannot be and they will not be a part of this proxy war. They're going to protecting themselves and their interests. It is a difficult decision because you are surrounded of both regional and global who is supporting another part. They don't want to have an independent power, an independent political power that can organize that relying on themselves and defending themselves, which is the basic for the democratic right in the Middle East. Was a decision, wise decision of the Rojava people and the political party of the Rojava people. They started to organizing themselves. The coordinates that the people, the area, all the region will be protected, defended, and cannot afford as well to be part of this brutal sectarian war in Syria. This makes it very clear that emerged that the grassroots movement, for democracy and the democracy and peace and ethnic minorities, ethnic communities, I call them usually, join together to administrate themselves, to rule themselves, to have their decision. And this is one a crucial point that the administration in Rojava have the crucial decision. They can determine themselves jointly together with different ethnic minorities, ethnic and religious, even race minorities, Arab, Turkmen, Assyrian, Christian, Yazidi, and another ethnic people in the Rojava. And this was the crucial point that make it the main role that was the focus of Rojava, which was inspiring of this movement, of this organization in that way. And therefore, international support, the international power and regional power was trying to avoid it, not talk about it, and not support it and exclude it. The Rojava movement, the Rojava establishment administration, since established July 2012, have been excluded from the international forums, the international discussion, and they tried to not including them in Geneva and in another international decision making. This was the problem, the main crucial issue that we're facing and we're still facing now, the Syrian opposition, unfortunately, their will, their self-determination, their political will have been hijacked, lost. So the Syrian opposition, we do not have our will. This is our will is controlled. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Turkey was involved in this and make it all. We want to have a religious country in Syria. We don't want to have a democratic. We don't have it, what they call it, secular. This is the one main issue in the post-war in Syria. The main issue was which kind of country or which kind of country we can have it in post-Syrian war. Is it sectarian or is it a religious? Michael mentioned brotherhood or another coalition which are based in Turkey today. So the crucial role of the international relations and international democracy, I think it happened where the people have been organizing themselves, they have their will, they've shown the Rojava people since the pro-democratic uprising, and since they stand clear against the brutal regime, the dictator regime in Damascus and in the region, and against this brutal dark forces which are coming from old centuries to echo the humanitarian value in the region. This was clear, and we think that this clear stand, make it the inspiring international and regional progressive movement, was inspiring for them to follow and to support it. Because the people on the ground, they have been relying on themselves despite all restricted resources, all restricted movement. They could defend themselves. They could show that they are standing for freedom, democracy, and gender equality and ecological in the area. And this was the symbol of the pillar of the Rojava administration. And in this context, I think that the will of resistance, which happened in Rojava, make it the globalization of the support of the people. When the people decided, with a couple of thousand maybe, in town like Kobane, they decided they will decide to the end, and then will put the responsibility on the international level and the regional level. So this thousands of people decided to stay in the end, to defend themselves, to protect their villages, families, and towns. Then there is the moral duty of the international community and the international humanitarian to get to help these people because they're standing for a peace and democracy in the region. This is why was the globalization, and this is the main point is that the global terrorism making it or creating that the global resistance. This has been our slogan, and we said it for 3 years ago in Syria that these people cannot be trusted. They are getting that truth, and they want to have power. They're fighting and they're killing. The cut off of human being is not a symbol for fighting against Assad. This was time passing on, and it was unfortunately it was the regional power which I mentioned the countries, and it was Western, including UK, France, and US. Was supporting. We have been telling them that these people, right? We supporting them. They have been supporting FSA, and now FSA have joined either Jabhat al-Nusra or ISIS in the region. And this one was supporting, and this was under the control of the question.
Sure. And this, I'm sorry to cut you off. We just wanted to perhaps continue with some of the questions we have. There is quite a few to get through. So perhaps we can start by discussing more humanitarian issues, specifically humanitarian issues. I realise that so
we realised one thing that's actually been picked up on is the wish for the Kurds to coexist peacefully amongst themselves. Now that incorporates, the various entities within the region, be they Kurdish or non-Kurdish. Why should the international community, on a humanitarian level, be willing to preserve these values, in addition to values of democracy and liberalisation, as mentioned before? Perhaps Ben would like to start us off by speaking a bit about this. What will happen is we'll start off by questions and questions we prepared, and then towards the end we will.
Okay, I think it's a bit unfair on the audience, frankly.
We'll try and cover as long as we possibly can at the end for questions. Maybe not.
Your question is, why should the international community assist on the humanitarian level?
With regards to the fact that the Kurds are maintaining this peaceful coexistence, and this is a fundamental issue to push forward and maintain throughout the region.
Well, if you want the truth, the people in Kurdistan and Iraq have always lived in harmony with Christians, Yazidis, Sunnis, Shias. We haven't really had that kind of religious intolerance. And honestly, I think everybody took it for granted. We all thought this was normal until Westerners started to arrive and tell us, oh, how unusual this is. And in other parts of the Middle East, you would get your hand cut off or your head cut off if you're a Christian. I think this is something that Kurds everywhere, not just in Bashur, but everywhere, should be very proud of, and something that we should fight to defend. Because by being tolerant, by living peaceful coexistence with each other, we are standing for everything that against everything that ISIS stands for. ISIS means bigotry. ISIS means racism. ISIS means it's okay to rape and kill women and children who are female. This is what ISIS stands for, and I think we Kurds naturally abhor that. Why should the international community support that? Well, the answer is very obvious, but I think, frankly, the international community doesn't really think along those lines. We in the Kurdistan region in Iraq have been arguing for a very long time that Kurdistan is a beacon for peace, for stability, for peaceful coexistence, and that the West should be supporting us. We have had support from the West. We've had a lot of engagement, for example, in trade and business, in diplomacy. We have about 25 international countries represented in Kurdistan through consulates and so on. So there is a lot of engagement. But do they really appreciate that Kurdistan should be supported because of that? No, because Kurdistan represents so many other threats. We are a threat to the Sykes-Picot Agreement. If you really want to support the Kurds, then maybe those naughty Kurds will have an idea of independence one day. So the way I see it, there has always been a ceiling, a limit to the support that the West will give to the Kurds, whether it's military, humanitarian, or even political.
I think foreign policy is always a very difficult balance between interests and values. And increasingly, in the post-colonial world, the issue of values tends to pop up quite a lot. It's not very comfortable to have the United Kingdom or the United States careering into the Middle East, telling people what to do, how to live their lives, rearranging their politics for them ad hoc, sometimes without forethought about what the longer-term ramifications of those are. Nevertheless, I think there are times when intervention perhaps touches more on the values side of foreign policy and actually what is moral and what is just. So Barzani asked, why should we do it? Well, we should do it because it's right. It's a very simple thing to say. It's a very simple thing to try and stop people starving to death in -5 temperatures with nothing but a sheet cloth covering them and their 10 children. It's right to stop people from being massacred who are standing on a mountain surrounded by ISIS. It's right to provide shelter and hope for 1 million Iraqis, 1 million Syrians going into these Kurdish regions. It's just a human thing to do. It's what I'm going to do with national interest. Ultimately, I think, on this question, for once, actually, the humanitarian issue led from the front. I think the Shingal or Sinjar debate the Yazidis. But let's be honest, most non-Kurds have never heard of the Yazidi before, right? Most Americans have certainly never heard of the Yazidi, let alone a Kurd. So why is it suddenly been so emotive that we've been dragged into this conflict that we've only just got out of? Well, it's about values. People don't want to see this group ISIS massacring people who have no means of defending themselves. And they want to do something to stop it. Now, we can all talk about the Sykes-Picot issue and what the United Kingdom did wrong. You know, it goes on in academic debates, it goes on in policy debates. It's still part of the region today. But there are some things within that framework that you can do that are positive, that create results on the ground immediately. And I think that the humanitarian assistance, which is not enough, by the way, and one of the problems Bayan pointed to is the fact that the UN is so bureaucratic and slow that individual nations actually can't get the aid to the ground quick enough as these people are beginning to face plummeting temperatures and driving rain. That is unfortunately life. We tend to think the international community sometimes works better multilaterally than bilaterally, but actually it's not true. Sometimes it's better if the UK just drives in there and gets the aid to the floor and gets it delivered. But hey, this is the world we live in nowadays. So I think what we need to say is that, first of all, there is a moral imperative here. It may not be comfortable to be operating in Iraq again, but hey, I think ultimately, if we're going to try and see the region move forward, we've got to be able to send a message to any minority that's living there that has a right to live in these countries. Yazidis have a right to exist, Christians have a right to exist, Kurds, Sunni, Shia, all have a right to exist. If they have a sense that actually someone will come to help if they need them in their hour of need, then I think that sends a powerful message to those people who try to destroy them.
On the grounds of the international support, necessity, of course, the battle against what we are talking all this time, the Islamic State, is to be successful, since I'm sure there is a big amount in advanced weaponry, in other warfare tools at the moment on the ground. At the same time, of course, the confrontation of any sort of extremism for the sake of what we said of this regional coexistence is a must when thousands of civilians are being killed on a daily basis. But actually, when it comes to the foreign policy implementation, I'm not really sure the extent to which the role of the values are there. I'm talking the international relations perspective when it comes to international powers. The US administration in particular, I'm sure that they are very much concerned with minority human rights issues, but at the same time I'm wondering why, whereas the initial stance of the US was quite neutral or distant, change when the first immediate response from the Iranian state of sending troops to fight the Islamic State in Iraq. It was a rhetorical question. Thank you.
I think it's very crucial and very important as well. This is an international community's duty to protect safety and the rights to protect the civilian, and this is something that we have by this reform. This is the international, which should not say, it has to do not is their duty, and they do their duty. And I'm totally clear about it. And the second thing, I think there are, as mentioned, the moral duty of protecting the value. Contradicting the empire. This is was the American-led coalition against ISIS. A motive was stated by the U.S. Department that they interfering and they supporting the Kurds on the ground in Tripoli because they have a moral duty to protect the civilian before making measures to the powers in the region and to the Western forces as well. And the second it is very important that the forces who supported this local forces, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, now are including the US-led coalition, it is their duty to defeat and eliminate this threat because they support it. They created, sorry for the word, who created this mess and take it out of this mess. And America doing this. And I'm asking Michael, why you cannot doing this? You have been supporting SSA 3 years, and as a Kurdish forces, I was under the siege 3 years in front of all this the war. Nobody asked me, allow me to ask even in international platform. And now you say, you're not doing it. You created, you supported FSA, you said the war rebel. France and UK have a 40 billion, than what they call it. You can see it, you are academic and you're much better than me to research. They supported this group, what they call it the Syrian opposition, under the umbrella of the FSA. And all this weapon, maybe they call it, sorry, non-lethal weapon, send it to Syrian opposition since 3 years, and now they realize that their money has been wasted and have been handed over to ISIS. And therefore, your duty, you support these people, you empower them against the democratic value in Syria or in the region, so you have to take them out. So it's your duty, you take it, and you are not grateful for that. We are grateful you are doing this because you created that. Thank you.
Thank you. So we've had a brief discussion about humanitarian aid for Kurdistan. As I said in the beginning, we need to also focus on other forms of international support that international community can offer Kurds. So let's move on to military support. Often there are calls from the Kurdistan, both the Kurdistan Regional Government and the Democratic Union Party for greater military support. What content encompasses this request, and why is it so vital that Kurdistan receives military international support?
Thank you. Well, I touched on this earlier. In the Kurdistan region in Iraq, our Peshmerga, according to the constitution, should be part of Iraq's defense forces. To us, that means that they should get paid out of Iraq's defense budget. They should get the same training as another soldier. They should get the same weapons as another soldier in Iraq. This has never been the case. This is something that we argued with Prime Minister Maliki over and over again. But we also pointed this out to the United States, which was arming Iraq and training the soldiers, so that when ISIS came, our Peshmerga, brave though they may be, were under-equipped, didn't have the guns or tanks or long-range artillery necessary, and didn't have the training either. Crucially, they had the will to fight, and that is what the Iraqi army lacked. Despite the billions of dollars of weapons and training, the Iraqi army in Mosul literally disappeared in a puff of smoke. The will to fight is what was lacking. Today we're asking the international community to supply training, weapons, and we don't want just replacement bullets for our Kalashnikovs. We want heavy advanced weaponry that can match and outgun ISIS if we're talking about defeating ISIS. We also tried very hard for a very long time to get weapons into Kobani. We tried to get the international community to act much more quickly than they did. It was heartbreaking for anybody to see those images, to hear the stories coming out of Kobani, not to know that the world was watching and not acting. As you know, I'm sure about 150 Iraqi Kurdish Peshmerga have now joined their fellow Peshmerga in Kobani and are providing support, and they've taken some weapons with them. It's crucial that the international community supports the Kurds wherever we are, whichever part of Kurdistan we are, when we're fighting ISIS, when we're fighting any form of extremism. We Kurds have the will to fight, as has already been said by colleagues on this panel. We defend our land, we defend peace, we defend democracy, and this is something that the West believes in. It promotes these values. You can't just promote these values by writing treaties. You have to promote these values by defending them on the ground and supporting the people that fight for those values on the ground.
I think I take both Bayan and Alan's point that not enough is being done. And the reaction of the international community, or the United Kingdom in particular, has been at times schizophrenic and I would say problematic in terms of the messages it sends out. But I think there is, a difference in between the way that the UK tends to look at the KRG, which has been given constitutional authority to maintain an army and a structured force and to receive certain benefits from the Iraqi states, and also have its own economic and military benefits, and what Alan and the PYD did in Syria, where there just simply is no structure to work within. We have no idea what is legal, is not legal anymore in Syria. There just is nothing where you can put a yardstick and say, this is right, this is wrong. And then, of course, the problem that we have with Kobani is the Turks. And I think Alan's right to be angry, he's right to be frustrated, but we do have a NATO partner, which is Turkey. They're an ally. Now, right now, that relationship has been very strained. I can assure you that there have been lots of honest conversations going on with the Turks about the nature of their support and the way they behaved in Kobani. And it's been an uncomfortable month or two. But the problem, of course, still stands in that they have critical national interests. They have more of a say in the region than perhaps we do. But then power tends to win out, and actually the United States overrode that concern. It's not an ability that we have. We cannot put 2 carrier groups into the region and fly 18 F-16s or F-18s, and even the F-22 now, which is can't spot it on radar. We don't have that capacity anymore. We've still got 2 carriers being built. We can't deploy that type of firepower into the region. The United States did, and it worked quickly. So, as a half apology to Alan, what I'd say is we just don't have the assets in theatre. We have 6 tornadoes currently in Kurdistan regional government territory, which are flying around a ton of sand, not finding many targets. This is smart. They've changed their operational methods. We can't find them very easily. And both ourselves and the French are having problems being able to accurately identify who is a civilian, who is ISIS. And we have very strict rules of engagement. Let me be clear, the Americans do not have the types of rules of engagement the British have. We have to have an absolutely positive identity that that person is a terrorist and there is no civilian around them before we can engage. That is not the same in the United States. So it's very much more limited in terms of the way that we fight or we intervene in these conflicts. So that's the first point I made. The second point is training. I think training for the Peshmerga is needed. There are some structural problems there. There's still differences between PUK strands and KDP strands. There is a ministry of Peshmerga run by Iran, but again, on the ground, it's not having the kind of effect that we perhaps would like to see in terms of its resilience, providing a front status there. The Kurds do need heavy weapons, absolutely they need heavy weapons. ISIS are coming at them with tow missiles, they're coming at them with Humvees. They've got M1 Abrams tanks. Bear in mind that M1 Abrams is much better than any other tank in the region by a country mile. The Kurds are walking up with RPGs. It's a difficult situation. Now, I think in terms of the policy, you may or may not have seen, but the British were there on the ground just outside the hill, training the Peshmerga on grounding machine guns as a 50 caliber heavy machine guns, which are quite good at stopping Humvees. They're training them on things like explosive ordnance clearance, which is an extremely big problem right now in recapturing areas that ISIS have taken. And there will be some logistical and structural issues, but bear in mind, on top of the Kurdish issue, there's also the issue of the Iraqi army. We can prop up the Kurds as much as we want, but if the Iraqi army keeps collapsing, we're going to be in this problem for years. So there's a huge question about larger false projection in the region, which frankly nobody has an answer to. Nobody has an answer as to how to fix the problems in Iraq, because they are so deep and so ingrained, and it is a product of poor training, poor management, corruption. This is a debate that's going to just keep rolling, I'm afraid. The last point I think is the PYD and the Peshmerga fight in very different ways. If you are wanting to train the PYD or the YPG, more accurately, in the ways that the Peshmerga fight, it's not going to be very successful. One of the reasons that the YPG is successful is because they fight like guerrilla fighters. And that's not really where we can play a role. The fact that they're able to beat ISIS at their own game is what makes them so successful. Peshmerga is different, they're a mechanized force, so we have to adjust the training in a slightly different way. Could training be provided for both? Yes, and it should be, but those debates again are influenced by the text. It's a complicated conversation, I'm afraid. But what I can say is that there's definitely an appetite to do more, and the results will hopefully be seen in the coming weeks. I think already the military situation on the ground in both Rojava and Bashar is looking a lot stronger than it was a month ago. So there are some positives.
Alternatively, I mean, necessarily we can start a little earlier. Sure, just one more question and then we will start on. Perhaps a political, diplomatic sort of resistance in this way. So, can we see a bettering of ties between the KRG and the PYD with the Peshmerga deployment to Kobani? And is the United Kurdistan a more respectable? Sure, can we ask the question? Sure.
I don't know because I want to answer. I just continue. Criticize very much. Sometimes we have an answer about everything, so I have to put you up with it now. When it comes to this section of the question about the military needs, I think to have the political representatives here, which are indirect dealing with the battleground, they are the ones that they can have a more complete image to transfer. So the only thing I have to say is that I'm sure there is a need in advanced weaponry and probably other welfare tools, artillery, but I want to pass the floor to you.
Thank you. I totally agree. This is very crucial. Was very crucial. I totally agree with the speakers. The military support and the military training is not needed as needed in against this brutal ISIS war because they have been captured more advanced weapons and for that another area, even for the Syria regime as well and Iraq. They have been the weapon, looted weapon from the region, and therefore the Kurdish forces they do need it. And I think it was very crucial and very progressive and supported by the Kurdish community. The decision of the KRG sending an expert military support to YPG in Kobani and another area, and the voluntary and the support of the 1,500 Kurdish forces from northern Kurdistan and Kobani was very crucial as well. And from another regional agreed with some country of FSA, which is called Furat Volcano agreement, they are in Kobani as well. Fighting beside the Kurdish forces. And I think this united Kurdish forces, make it since arriving in Kobani, make it very, very crucial, very important that Kurdish forces both as mentioned about in Zamor and another area in Shengal, the Kurdish forces are advancing, progressing, and defeating in Kobani as well. Most of the outskirts of Kobani have been controlled by the Kurdish forces, and some villages, external villages have been outside, so have been liberated and controlled. And the most strategic thing that happened yesterday that the Kurdish forces in Kobane, the joint Kurdish forces in Kobane, has controlled the hill mentioned to the hill, which is very high hill, controlling Kobane and the Turkish side. And another point was they controlling the main supply of the ISIS coming from Raqqa and from Mosul to reinforcement ISIS from there. They have the road which goes to Tel Aviv and Raqqa, the main road. So that ISIS has been isolated and will be surrounded, and hopefully there will be, and this is thanks to all the national Kurdish forces, national Kurdish and regional Syrian the armies acting there. And I think this is what I think is very important. The second important thing, I think the Kurds in Syria, the Kurdish people in Syria especially, Mark is expert. He went to Navros camp, by the way, and I was expecting he tell you, he went to there, he saw the YPG camps, he met them, and he saw the Yazidi refugee in Navros camp in Derek. So he's not more expert than me, how they're capable and how can they do. And I think the Kurdish forces in Rojava have been different training, and they are sufficient, they have been sufficient. It's not just happened in Kobane. We have been fighting both the regime and ISIS since 3 years. We have done it in Kamishli and in another in Afrin and another besieged area. So it's nothing new for us. And we have shown, and the Kurdish forces in Rojava have shown they are capable, they have a technique, they have a strategy against this brutal jihadists, what we call the terrorists, coming to destabilizing the area. So the more sufficient way, the mechanism is that the international community, the more Western can support, because the Kurd was underarmed. So the Kurdish forces in Rojava, they do need, as Marianne mentioned it, they do need advanced weapon technology, weapon training. I think they've shown they are capable, and in terms of humanitarian, military, human numbers, there are not enough fighters. There are more freewheeling people fighting on the ground. There are volunteers on the ground supporting them logistically. I think all they need is the advanced, more technical weapons they need. Thank you.
So obviously there's a very clear demand for audience to get involved in those questions, and we must stick to the nature of the event, which is indeed a discussion. So let's fire away and get some questions from the audience. I'd just like to say though, we'll take 3 questions at a time. Give the name, who your question is directed at, and also please do bear in mind you are limited for time, so keep it brief, and also bear in mind that this is Kurdistan why international support is crucial. So keep the question relevant. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Nico. See this speech. What I want to ask Mr. Dr. Alan Semo is, as everyone here knows, the ISIS gangs have quite a lot of international support. Everybody knows there's probably more than 500 British people fighting for ISIS right now. And you know, and there was even the other day, there was some Australian teenager that looked like Justin Bieber who was saying that how the ISIS must kill us and all that. And what I want to ask you, and what I want to hear is, what is the equivalent situation, I say, or not the equivalent, what is the analog situation in terms of the YPG and YPJ? How many international volunteers are fighting against the ISIS with the forces, of the people's forces in Rojava? And what is the process of them being
accepted, received in the area, drained perhaps, or just allocated in some kind of force to fight the actual military strategy.
So, yeah. All right. My name is Ali. I'm a senior. I studied technology in London South University. I think it's the main question is still remains it's not answer. Like example, like Mosul, Iraqi government is still very quiet. They don't do any action in Mosul, which is in the northern of Iraq. This is for me it's very dangerous because there's I saw other day in the TV there's children the ISIS are teaching children how to getting their ideas and stuff. And I don't know why the Iraqi they are very quiet. But my question is to Mrs. Fan. The question is how can Kurdish desperately evolve in raising awareness about the support needed? That's the first question. And the second question is what's the measure KRG has put in place in order to effectively coordinate all the international support that may become. So thank you very much for everything.
My name is Feroz Toski. I'm a PhD student at SOAS University. Of course, I don't want to argue about the humanitarian and military support. Of course, that is needed. I don't think anyone here argues about it. But my question is that we had Al Qaeda, we had Al Qaeda years ago, and we have ISIS today. We recently heard from news and a new group coming from Egypt. So these groups are forcing by some, as Dr. Alan mentioned, some external factors, some external country. I don't want to name anyone. And also, as Michael mentioned, there are some internal issues of it in terms of the constitution. Constitution is not ineffective in these countries like countries, Iraq, Syria. Of course, if I want to go in an Iraqi crisis now, the Prime Minister, as Dan mentioned, is not Prime Minister of the whole Iraqi. We are Kurds. We've been punished and we've been punished by former Prime Minister.
Your question, please.
Yeah, Prime Minister Saddam Hussein and again Maliki and Abedi. So the question is here for Mr. Michael. Apart from this, like a military and humanitarian force, what is the other solution for Iraq crisis at the moment? As we are de facto now, Shias down Kurdistan and Sunnistan, to be understand. The second question for Bayan and what is the role of KRG's representative in other countries, in particular in UK? How they gonna what is their role to bring this message to the international community, like the Kurdish political issue, not just Kurdish political issue.
Thank you very much. So, Alan, would you like to take the first question? So, I insist do international going across.
Sure. Yes. Unfortunately, we would like to have an international volunteer to at least to do or provide the logistics, not to fight on the front line. You have seen in the media, we totally agree. We warned this country, and officially we warned them that there are some European or particularly UK from UK have been joining ISIS via Turkey. We have shown them the proof, their passport, the number, and it was published 3 years ago by YPG, which captured an American and another English passport, and we showed them into the media. This is the people coming from where, from Turkey, and all this journey, and we warned them, and unfortunately they keep quiet. On that time, they couldn't rebel, therefore they said that they're okay, that's fine. They were not naughty boys. Now today they are naughty, unfortunately. So we would like to have support internationally. We have very few, very few, just a couple of people. it may not exceed 20 people internationally. But we have from another part of Kurdistan about 2,000 people volunteering from Kurdistan, different part of Kurdistan. But from the international and European, we haven't got more than 20 people now fighting. The most issue we facing was that the YPG have signed the war agreement in Geneva, the Geneva War Convention, which they not allowed to send somebody without military training to the front. They are not allowed to recruit under 18, and they have been agreement between YPG and the Geneva War Commission, and therefore we receive and we welcome voluntary people coming to Rojava to support. First time we have to make sure we treat military if they wanted to fight. We are not allowing any civilian go without any training to the front. They can come and provide food, logistics, anything else that can be behind the safe areas. They can do it, which they initially did it. But today we see Americans and another people fighting on the front. They are already have their training, their own training, and they have been trained by YPG as well. We will come there, and I think there are some connection. Most of them they're doing directly to them. The political party will not be involved in this, and we cannot unfortunately assess in this matter. So there are ways online and direct contact with YPG. They go there with time, and then they'll give their contract, and they can communicate in different languages. And I would advise to contact them if it's any interest. Thank you.
Could I make a very quick follow-up? Very quick. Could you name?
Sorry, we're very strapped for time. I was actually going to say, if we can keep the questions limited, and also the replies, as we were scheduled to finish at 7:30. We're going to get through as much material as we can. So, I don't know if you wanted to answer the question we had from Rizka.
Yes, I think there were two questions, if I remember. One about what the Kurdish diaspora can do to raise awareness of the support that's needed. The other is how is the KRG, the Kurdistan government, coordinating the international support? There was also a question from the gentleman at the back about the role of the representations in garnering political support. I just gave answer all of those. Well, by participating in meetings like this, I think you're showing your support. Hopefully you will tell your friends and colleagues about some of the points that have been raised today. Our office is in touch with about 30 Kurdish organizations, community associations, political organizations, student organizations. We have a mailing list of about 10,000 people where we send weekly updates on the humanitarian, political, and military front. If you want to get these weekly updates, please send me your email address. So we keep everybody updated. There are many charities and charity events organized by the Kurdish community. Those who tell us about them and they look legitimate, we publicize them and we support them however we can. We are cash strapped. As we said earlier, Baghdad has had an economic embargo on the Kurdistan region for all of this year. So that affects our budget too in London. So we're very limited in what we can spend money on, but sending emails, participating in events like this, holding demonstrations, all of that sort of thing will help. And I think another way that the Kurdish community, wherever they're from, it doesn't matter, Rojava, Baku, Manshur, any part of Kurdistan. If you live in the UK, you can influence politics in the UK. Write to your member of parliament, write to your local council. It's election year. 2015 is election year. There are many marginal seats. There are many seats where 200 votes will make the difference between a Conservative or a Labour or a Lib Dem MP. If there are 200 Kurdish voters in that constituency, you can influence politics there. Use your political power wisely. Look up who are your candidates in your area. What is the best way to influence how they get elected, and how can you rally your friends to support you? How is the international support coordinated by the KRG? Well, the international support comes in three ways. One is the humanitarian, the other is military, the other is, I suppose, political or diplomatic. On the political and diplomatic front, I suppose the front line is the representations, so people like me, but also many countries have embassies in Baghdad and they have consulates in Erbil. But also there are high-level meetings with President Barzani, with the Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, with the relevant ministers. That's how the diplomacy is handled. The humanitarian effort is coordinated through the Interior Ministry in Kurdistan. Why the Interior Ministry? Because the governors come under the umbrella of the Interior Ministry, and it's the job of each governor to look after the refugees and the IDPs in their province. We are about to establish a joint crisis centre in Erbil that will oversee all of the humanitarian assistance. The military effort is dealt with through the Ministry of Peshmerga, which holds regular meetings with all of the representatives of the international coalition that are in Erbil. Not all of them are in Erbil, but some of them are there, and they have regular meetings with the Ministry of Peshmerga to discuss the military response. I hope I've answered all of those questions.
I will solve the right question. How long have we got? Another hour, we can keep going. I'm going to try and make this really quick. And the first thing you want to do is re-establish security. Bearing in mind that the establishment of security does not fix political divisions or ethnic sectarian divisions, but people have got to stop dying. The reason that you need security is it stops population movements, it stops the draining of resources that can go into other fields. And when you can do that, then you can start looking about other pathways. Now, currently, there is basically a two-pronged track going on. One is the sort of reconciliation of Baghdad as the center of political power in the rest of Iraq. Whilst two, there's this coalition which is being put together to fight ISIS. So you've got the military and the political kind of working side by side. The problem is they're very heavily dependent on each other. So if one starts to slip, the other one's going to slip. You can't have a wonderful political agreement if ISIS is standing in the middle of the green zone. Likewise, you cannot have military security if the Sunni and the Shia are turning on each other and the battle brigade is fighting with Salah and all these kinds of things. So, first things first, I think what needs to happen is that the coalition needs to step up its activities. It needs to coordinate better with the Iraqi forces on the ground. The problem is, and then there was a point about why aren't the Iraqis in Mosul? Well, they can't be in Mosul. They lost 3 divisions, 5,000 men, but they're not going to get back anytime soon. The equipment's gone, the training's gone, what the training was. We've got to have a real think about how we're going to rebuild the Iraqi army. It's going to take years and years. And this is not going to be something which can be solved, instantly by the Americans coming in. There's 1,500 Americans now on the ground in addition to the 1,000 Americans currently. That's not going to solve the security issue, because the first comment I made, an hour and a half ago, was about the collapse of the institutions themselves, which led to the rise of ISIS, which was then capitalized upon. Putting an army there doesn't stop any of these processes. So you have to have so many different layers of agreements. You have to have the Iranians and the Saudis buying into the agreement. Right? You have to have power sharing. Now, we've had some steps forward. The Defense Ministry and the Ministry of the Interior have been allocated. Hoshi Azabari, who is a Kurd, is now the Finance Minister. These are small, positive little steps. Bayan referred to the economic and oil-related agreement, which again is a small step. But it's only inches we're going forward here, because if we want to make big strides in that, we'll never get there. But I think ultimately what you have to do is focus on defeating ISIS. I think if you cannot do that, then the legitimacy of the Iraqi state will never exist, right? And particularly in the Sunni areas now. I mean, there's this idea of a national guard. Well, if you look at the Al-Nusra tribe who stood up to ISIS outside Hind, you'll see what happens when the tribes are empowered to stand up against ISIS. They lost 350 guys who were just put in a ditch and shot. So this idea needs to be completely reformulated. The problem is you cannot have a militant Shia militia like Saif al-Haq working next to a tribe from who has no interest whatsoever in coordinating them. So there's a lot of problems to work on. I hope I've tried to keep it within a framework.
Great stuff. Fantastic. So, one, your name, please, yes, and your questions too.
Yes, my name is Pedro Landry from Iraq, so I know the Islamic States. Genocide of whole generation, we went to stop every morning. We were proud of ISIS. Every day, for months, we don't rely on Iran. But my question is, I've been searching and talking to and influential terrorists in London. I went there to talk to those they be careful and on they said, why should we establish a secular for years we could go on. You know, I say that the parents helped me out. Thank you for that. Because the genocide was just perversion. But I never said sorry to anyone. Until I interacted with it. But it is something about this story that so send me out there. I will do your work. Dr. McConnell said, you have actually put boots on the ground. A lot.
I'm sorry, can we just have that question?
Yes. My question is, from your institute, why not divide secular units that are nothing to do with it, and I will manage to help I will think it.
Thank you. Another one, please. Yes, at the back.
My question, I would like to say that I'm really very pessimistic and hopeless about the energy that we don't get support from the international community. They can report this language that fought against Saddam's regime for many years. We didn't get support from someone, so we got success. We were not affiliated by Turkish army or by Saddam army, or by the army. Not because ISIS is there, but because it's that we have participated in weapons and fight against the countries. Why don't you rely on your own people in Kurdistan? Like now, Kurdistan, if you have some Kuba, you should not show that they are fighting against ISIS and they are successful. Why don't you rely on why don't you rely on pigments? Why don't you fight against together? You are good fight and you are successful. You have been fighting 90 years since been fighting, more than 20, now we become, I think that we are now not able to fight against before.
Can we just have your questions too?
The question is, my question, why don't you rely on your own folks, your own people, why don't you trust each other? That was made in Cook, for example. This was I like a program for instance, why don't you work together, cooperate together?
And to whom is your question? To whom is your question? Thank you. And the last one. Yes.
I'm Christian Carl from Foreign Policy Magazine. So the planned independence referendum has been postponed because of the war. Is there a timetable for a new referendum, and potentially a declaration of independence? Or will that be postponed indefinitely until ISIS could be defeated?
Thank you. Michael, would you like to start?
Mossadegh's not in power, so I'm not sure we're too interested in throwing him on the ground. Look, this is the sort of standard MEK line, right, of funding dissidents and then sending them in and they'll go and blow things up and destroy the regime in Tehran. Look, there's a lot of people in Iran that still like the regime. It's a regime.
Wake up.
But I wanted to do it in the framework of the government here to show that we were
Okay, I understand the question now. Right. So what you're asking for essentially is a sort of free Syrian army program for ID, essentially. Right. I think that could work if it was done within the framework of free Syrian army. There could be a mechanism whereby the PYD was able to get armored units which were fighting on its behalf, which were trained, equipped. Even perhaps we may be able to get the Saudis to do it, which I know I wouldn't like, but hey, you got to do what you got to do to get the weapons in. The point is this: is that actually the biggest stalling point to military integration with the PYD is simply that issue as to what direction is the PYD and the FSA, or the YPG and the FSA, where are they moving to? I think that there are alliance systems on the ground where the FSA fights hand in hand with the YPG, particularly in Afrin, and we've seen it now as well in Kobani as well. With my own eyes, I've seen Arab fighters who fight for the YPG. So there is a case to be made there. The problem is, again, the Turks. Now, I think the Turks would break on this issue if they were convinced that it was done within the framework of the Free Syrian Army. And I think there's your mechanism. In terms of training Christians and secular people, look, I think anybody who has been vetted is willing to go in. The problem is now that half these groups who've been vetted in Syria just threw down their weapons to Jabhat al-Nusra last week. It's not looking very good. So I think there's got to be okay, but as I said, there still needs to be a political mechanism for that. You can't just put people into a theatre without command and control. There has to be accountability structures. That's fine, but there needs to be an endpoint where everything's coordinated. And someone has to provide the money and someone has to provide the weapons. So there needs to be a coordination point, if that is there.
So can we have the next?
Thank you. I'll answer the last question first. First, there was never a timetable for the referendum. So I don't know how we can say it was postponed. We never actually had a timeline. President Barzani called for a referendum in July, but I have to say he'd been warning that he would do this for months, but of course the West wasn't really paying attention to the Kurds before ISIS took over Mosul. In the run-up to the Iraqi general elections, which took place in April, Maliki was sending out poisonous messages, very racist messages against Kurds. He was cutting off our money and so on. And President Barzani, in a speech around that time, said that if things didn't change in Iraq, that we would call for a referendum on independence. This was before the Iraqi elections in April, when ISIS turned up, divided Iraq essentially into three. President Barzani renewed his call for independence and asked the Kurdistan parliament to set up an election commission and to look into it. That process is still ongoing. The referendum can still be held. There isn't a timetable. And we know that the referendum, the outcome will be, most people will say, yes, we want an independent Kurdish state. But even then, I don't know what the question will be, but I doubt that the question will say, and I want that independence instantly. I think the referendum result would give the Kurdish authorities the authority or the empowerment to then go for independence when the time is right. The question of independence will always be there. If you're Kurdish, you have this eye floating over your head. I can see it over all of your heads. You all want to be independent. And that's a fact. And we will achieve independence one day, whether the world likes it or not, whether our neighbors like it or not. We will be an independent state. intelligently. That's the key. Regarding the other question from the very pessimistic gentleman, please don't be pessimistic. We are working together. You know, I'm very proud that when ISIL first attacked Mosul and we weren't sure whether they were going to attack Kurdistan or not, Kurds, and by Kurds I mean the political parties from all 4 parts of Kurdistan, came and said, we will fight with you, KRG, to protect your achievements. What you've achieved in southern Kurdistan is an achievement for all of us. Kurds from all parts of Kurdistan did that. The reason why some of that assistance has been provided, some has not, is because of the complex nature of the politics of the Middle East. That's the simplest or the best way that I can put it. It doesn't mean that we're divided, and you yourself highlighted a crucial meeting in Doha between Saleh Muslim and President Barzani, which resulted in a very good agreement. And right now we have Iraqi Kurdish Peshmerga fighting in Rojava, supporting the people in Peshmerga and Kobani. I think there is cooperation, but at the end of the day, we also have to live with the real world, and the real world, unfortunately, is politically very complex.
Alan, would you like to answer that part as well about, relying on themselves?
I totally agree with Bayan. We are proud of it. We are working together now. We don't need to quit working. We are on the ground working. We are proud of it. We're working together. And we're not relying, this is the point I want to point it out, we're not relying on any Western help. We have been resisting in Kobani, in Rojava we have been resisting in 3 years, and in Kobani we have been resisting a month before the international working force came in. So we have been relying on and we are going to rely on ourselves. Thank you.
I have a question myself actually for Dr. Mariana. You've written an amazing book about US foreign policy towards the Kurds since 1945. Anyone that hasn't read it, please do grab a copy because it's very, very interesting. Has US foreign policy towards the Kurds, in light of recent events in the region in Kurdistan, has it changed? Has it developed? And has the United States had a direct foreign policy toward the Kurds now? Because obviously in the past, as we know, the Kurds have always been a shadow in their respective states. There was never a direct foreign policy toward the Kurds as a nation themselves. So how has it changed? Do we now see a US foreign policy directed towards Kurdistan?
The question is very long. In general, I want to say that the US foreign policy, at least towards the Kurdistan regional government, it's, and in this context, it's direct Kurdish policy in the context of an institutionalized relationship based on agreements and so on is there from 2005 onwards. And so, no, 2014 is not that recent. I think it's going on, and of course, the US administration does not only nowadays have conduct with the direct official conduct with the KRG, with other, let's say, non-state entities. We see the different Kurdish parties in Syria, and so on, as well as in Turkey as well.
Fantastic. Please carry on.
The direct involvement of the US administration in 1999 in Abdullah Öcalan's capture, I think, personally, it can be considered the embryonic stage or the beginning of an interactive relationship that by necessity is going to be developed because of the circumstances in the Middle East in view of the peace process which is currently ongoing in Turkey. The leader of later. We also called for mediation. And at the end of the day, what is going on today, I think it brings again Kurdistan in the center of the Middle East region as it has happened ages ago. Kurdistan, I think today, in general, is the apple of discord between Tehran and Ankara. I think probably one of the reasons that we saw this international, especially from the US, not that much from the other European countries, use concern probably to save Kurdistan, probably lies also on the fact that a future Kurdistan, that it could be either left to an Iranian or to a Turkish control, would be something that I'm not very sure that they would very much like, since we are talking about the regional balance of power and stability. Something final and last, because I was talking about stages, I do believe that the US relations with the current case of the KRG, regardless of any kind of ups and downs, because you're always in the foreign policy, you have to consider the neighbors as well, is there and it's developing. And I'm very much optimistic that it has not stopped. And I'm sure because of the course of events in the Middle East that this thing will develop more. A final thing, just because all these questions, you never addressed anything to me, so I have to take the floor. And say that it was mentioned that the rise of Daesh of the Islamic State appeared because of the lack of institutionalization. Then I'm really not sure why the Islamic State did not really target Bashar al-Assad regime, did not target other Shia segments. And when it comes to Iraq, I think stability or security, it's a must in any way, as it was before the rise of the Islamic State. But at this point, I think we have to make a distinction between the Islamic State and probably the different views, the problematic relation, the problems that, of course, they are there between Baghdad and Erbil. Even before the Islamic State, I'm sure there were issues between the two governments. And of course, security was before there, as the Kurdistan region was one of the most secure places in the Middle East in the last 10 years. So I'm not sure if the hesitation between the Islamic State and security for the improvement of Iraq's institutionalization and the structures is very much there. I think the problem is what we're all now talking about, the peaceful actually coexistence. And for me, I think the Kurds, regardless of all this crisis that has really erupted and it's really dramatic, I think that this current international aid and support offered to the Kurds, because exactly, yes, their battle against the Islamic State has to be seen as a positive opportunity at the end of the day, from where they could take on and move forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we are going to have to draw a close there. I want to start off first by thanking our special guests for coming along. It's been a very insightful. And also, thanks to everyone coming down. I hope you've gained some sort of insight from tonight's event. Again, I want to remind you, if you guys saw a box at the front, please donate. And thank you very much.
Yeah.